And welcome to this edition of the Native News Update on this Monday, January 3rd, 2011. I'm your host for today's program, Paul DeMain. Many of the stories right here can also be found at our website at IndianCountryNews.com, and here are some of the news stories for the day from the Associated Press and other Native news sources. Authorities say the suspect in the killing of one man and wounding of another at a hotel on the Cherokee Indian Reservation has committed suicide. Swain County Sheriff Curtis Cochran told the Asheville Citizen-Times that John Stanley of Bryson City shot himself New Year's Eve as police closed in on him in Georgia, several hours after the North Carolina shooting. Authorities did not release the names of the men shot at the Quality Inn or any other circumstances of the shooting. The hotel, packed with guests celebrating New Year's Eve, was closed much of the day as investigators looked for evidence. The long legal battle over the route for a South Lawrence, Kansas traffic way will continue. Environmental groups and some Haskell Indian Nation University students say they will appeal a federal court ruling that allowed the traffic way to be built through a wetlands. Bob I, an attorney for the opponents, told the Lawrence Journal-World that the appeal would be filed with the U.S. 10th Circuit Court of Appeals in Denver, Colorado in the next few days. U.S. District Judge Catherine Vratil during November upheld a federal decision to run the traffic way through the northern part of the Baker wetlands. The opponents want the road to be built south of the wetlands. Along parts of the stream, the stench of rotting fish carcasses is overwhelming. The smell of success, says Kurt Nelson, Environmental Division Manager for the Tulalip Tribes in Washington. 10 years ago, Coho Creek was a drab, nameless, straight-as-an-arrow drainage ditch. Today, much of it is a meandering stream filled with salmon with a name to match. The Tulalip Tribes began working in 2000 to transform the ditch located behind the Quilceda village into a stream in which as many as 50 coho and 1,500 chum salmon have returned in a given year. So far, the tribes have spent about $1 million on the project. The tribes have gradually upgraded the stream over the past decade by removing or improving culverts, widening the stream and changing its course, adding spawn-friendly gravel, and using logs to create small ponds. After the first culvert near the south end of the stream was removed in 2000, chum salmon almost immediately began heading upstream to spawn through, though without success. The creek bed still was too sandy to hold the eggs. Later, more culverts were removed, allowing both chum and coho salmon to make it further upstream. The tribe started rebuilding the stream itself in the year 2007. And today we go to our Shoshone Bannock correspondent, Mark Trahant, with a little bit of a report of what he sees the upcoming congressional session proceeding to and resulting in as the New Year's opens. Mark Trahant, it's 2011, and we had a pretty hot year last year with healthcare and a change in Congress and almost tipping of the Senate in Washington, D.C. What can you tell me about what you think is coming down the pike here in 2011?
Well, Happy New Year, Paul. And outside my door, the thermometer reads -3, and I think that sort of chilling atmosphere is what we'll find on Capitol Hill. It's going to be very cold. The Indian Healthcare Improvement Act was attached to the Affordable Patient Control or Affordable Patient Protection Act, and that means the two are linked. And the Republicans are talking about repealing healthcare reform, but that means repealing the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act if they're successful. I think the odds are against it, but I think it's important to note it. They also say they want to do this through the budget. And this is really important to Indian country because the way the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act works is it's just an authorizing bill. It doesn't have any money attached. So they have to go through the entire process all over again for real money. And that's going to be very difficult in this Congress.
You think they're going to get some of it? I mean, number one, you're saying that there's this attempt to repeal the entire package,
right?
And the likelihood of that is minimal, isn't it? Because couldn't Obama just veto that for one thing?
He could veto it. Yesterday, the new Republican chairman of the committee that will deal with House issues is from Michigan, and he said that he thought he had the votes in the House to even get close to repeal, to override the president. The Senate, though, is another story. I just don't see how that could happen. Even if they could get 51 votes, they're certainly not going to get 66 votes. But when the money issues come up, I think that's when it gets really more difficult, because then they can go piece by piece. For example, the Indian Healthcare Improvement Act calls for more money for behavioral health. To get more money in an atmosphere when they're cutting other programs by 10, 5, 20% is going to be extraordinarily difficult.
They're going to eliminate some programs totally here in the next Congress.
That's very possible, absolutely. They're talking about rolling back for 5 years before the stimulus. And to give you an idea what that would mean, for Indian Health Service, it would mean a 20% reduction. You think of the lines in contract health and the shortages now, I call it the seeds of a terrible tragedy.
So you believe that, to me, it seems that repealing the Health Care Act is more symbolic, when perhaps the way to stymie the whole thing is simply to not fund most of its provisions.
Exactly. And that's what they'll try to do. Now, 80% of the provisions are on automatic pilot. Medicaid, Medicare, and those provisions, they can't do much with, because if you're eligible, the money's there. The problem for the people who support those programs is that Paul Ryan from your state of Wisconsin actually wants to roll back Medicaid and Medicare in serious, substantive ways. For example, he's talking about Medicare being cut off for those 55 and younger.
Okay.
Having the program end for those 55 and younger.
This is, and this would be the Medicare programs, or
Right.
how about Social Security? There's some Social Securities in the mix here somewhere as well.
Yeah, he's in the past called for what is essentially amount to privatizing Social Security, which it's interesting to me, because the numbers just don't add up if you do that. There's no way to fund the program as it currently exists and create a new second program for those who are younger. There's just no mathematically possible way to do that.
Okay, and do you think that this is what's going to launch this session of Congress? Is all this talk about health care and modifications, or do you see Congress going in numerous directions? I mean, they can't do tons of things.
Right. I think it's numerous directions. I think one of the big fights coming up very soon will be over the deficit ceiling. And you have to have an authorization to borrow money. The deficit tops $13 trillion. And yesterday on the talk shows, several Republicans talked about not approving a limit increase on that, basically a credit card limit. The White House responded that that represents the full faith and credit of the United States. So to suddenly cut off that credit limit would be to say that our debts aren't good, which the rest of the world would see in stark terms.
Right. You see things like educational funds for tribes, housing, and those kinds of things all in the chopping block as well.
It's going to be bitter, absolutely. It's going to be a very tough few years.
There's stuff in the pipeline that's being cut off. We're already seeing, for example, the state of Wisconsin has put a kibosh on a big transportation project because they elected a Republican governor. It was money that would have put people to work, and the governor said he's not going to put any more into this. That money wasn't returned. It just simply got allocated somewhere else.
That's part of my fear, is that the policies that are being promoted are going to just take the economy down further. It's already, the economy grew a little bit last year, but most of that was government. And if you take government out of the equation, I think we could be looking at a very serious second downturn.
Indeed. And most of those were in jobs creation. Basically, what people were saying is that they needed a jobs program to put people back to work and have them spend. And we don't see those kind of job programs that seem to be attached to the last depression. We don't see huge work crews. We see a lot of small projects, but it's difficult to see the impact, I guess. It's not visible like the Conservation Corps and those kinds of things.
Right, and then maybe that was a mistake, is to not make it more visible early on, so that people saw that. I mean, all the narrative is about the high unemployment rate, which remains stuck at around 10%, 9%, and they're not getting credit for reducing that. But at the same time, what's not part of that debate is what would it have been without these stimulus programs.
Right. Do you see any credibility? Do you see any possibility in what's going on the other side of things? And that is, from my perspective, the internet bringing access to the Indian community to the outside world. If Native people focused on developing their own micro businesses and those kinds of things, do you think that is a kind of a thrust that could replace some of these other projects? I mean, there's not going to be a lot of building and infrastructure going on in the conventional way as in pass-through A&A grants. You saw
Right.
multi-purpose buildings and administrative buildings and projects like that. But I don't think there's going to be any money for that. So
I agree. I think the tribes that handle this the best will be those that are careful with their money, look for ways they can build local micro businesses, small businesses, creating jobs, and just recognize that the federal government is going to be very stingy for the next couple of years.
are tribal per capita is an answer?
Well, personally, I've always voted against per capita because it seems to be money that goes to car dealers more than it goes to the community. And I'd rather see money that sticks.
Cash flows straight out of the community, which has been the history of money that the government poured into Indian reservations, poured in and poured right back out, rather than bouncing around.
Which is why we need micro businesses and things that recirculate it to keep the money going from one person to another rather than just leaving the reservation.
Okay, sounds good, Mark. We'll keep in touch with you. We'll keep an eye on what's going on with legislation and let us know what's happening.
Very good.
And that is the latest roundup of news from Indian Country on this edition of the Native News Update. We want to thank you all for joining and come back again soon. Miigwech.